Good evening, everyone. For Telesur English, I'm Sarah Begum in Caracas, Venezuela. We start tonight in Cuba, where Cuban officials sat down with the highest level U.S. delegation to visit Havana in 35 years for landmark talks on reopening embassies and thawing long frozen ties. The two sides claimed a good first day on Wednesday, despite persistent disagreements over U.S. migration policies, which Havana says encourages Cubans to flee to nearby Florida. Cuban officials have also downplayed expectations of major breakthroughs this week, stressing that normalizing ties will be a long and complex process. And for the latest on the situation, we go to our correspondent, Alexandra Hall.
2 days of historic talks between top U.S. diplomats and their Cuban counterparts in Havana came to an end on Thursday. While Wednesday's discussions were more about immigration, today's talks focus on solving the technical issues of opening embassies and also agreeing to the principles of these diplomatic relations, which were just announced last December. Now, obviously, both parties are coming to the table with their own interests. For the United States, what's important is ending the travel restrictions for their diplomats and also asking Cuba to release U.S. fugitives living on the island. Cuban officials have said that they will not extradite Americans living under political asylum in Cuba. What's more important for them is that Cuba is removed from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Now, while no future date has been announced for the next round of discussions, that will likely be scheduled in the weeks ahead as we approach the Summit of the Americas, which both Presidents Obama and Castro will be attending for the first time. Reporting in Washington, I'm Alexandra Hall for Telesur.
The Cuban delegation reported that the talks were held in a respectful and constructive climate. Lead Cuban diplomat Josefina Vidal said it will be a long process, but it had started on the right foot.
Esta reunión se desarrolló en un clima respetuoso.
This meeting took place in a friendly, professional and constructive climate. The Cuban delegation reiterated the readiness on the part of our government to continue holding respectful dialogue with the government of the United States, based on the sovereign equality and reciprocity without undermining national independence and the self-determination of our people.
La reciprocidad sin menoscabo a la
The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said that there were certain things that still needed to be done.
Our hope is that the policy of normalization will put us in a stronger position to advance our interests and our values that I just talked about and to empower the people of Cuba ultimately.
Moving to Argentina, President Cristina Fernandez thinks that the death of the prosecutor investigating the 1994 bombing of the Argentine-Israeli Association was a suicide. For more on the situation, we turn to Leo Poblete Caduti in Buenos Aires.
President Cristina Fernandez has published a second letter since news of the death of prosecutor Alberto Nisman was known, in which she accounts for her suspicions about the death of the prosecutor and says that she is convinced that it was not a suicide. The president returns to emphasise in the letter arguments as to why the accusations made by Nisman are false. For example, she again denies that Argentina asked Interpol to lift red alerts. She adverts that the agents reported do not belong to the Secretariat of Intelligence and that trade with Iran, far from increasing after the memorandum, declined, also stating that Argentina never bought oil from Iran. The judiciary continues to work to clarify the death of the prosecutor, and meanwhile the national government has announced through the Chief of Cabinet, Jorge Capitanich, that all institutional support is available in order to clarify the prosecutor's death. As more information develops in the story, you'll be first to know here on Telesur. I'm Leo Poblete from Buenos Aires. Back to our main studios in Caracas.
President Fernandez published a letter on Facebook pointing out the inconsistencies in the opposition charges. In the letter, the head of state said they used him alive, and after they needed him dead, this is sad and terrible. The prosecutor was given false information, said the leader, regarding the supposed intelligence agents mentioned in Nisman's notes. The president of Argentina also pointed out that this is almost a replica of what I saw in the commission that followed the original investigation. The Argentine Chief of Cabinet, Jorge Capitanich, dismissed the arguments, claiming the government was involved in a cover-up, reiterating that they are baseless.
La denuncia, oportunamente presentada, The complaint was filed in an opportunistic manner that had a well-known version that lacked any evidence. And in that sense, that we have implemented through the executive branch from 4 to nearly 31 million pesos in the budget for the investigation into this very concern, there has been no, in any way, telling Interpol to remove the red alert on the suspects, as has been claimed and maintained by others.
In Colombia, the United Nations has released a report on the environmental challenges of the ongoing peace process. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita has the details.
For the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Colombia, Fabrizio Hochschild, a great paradox of armed conflict is that by preventing access to remote areas, it is ironically protecting the environment. However, international experience in Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Guatemala have shown that once a war-torn country steps into a post-conflict period, environmental protection becomes a major challenge.
And that's the case in Colombia. The conflict is in some of the most environmentally important areas. So, of course, it's very desirable to put an end to conflict to get access to those areas, but our concern is that it's done in a responsible way that is mindful of the impact on the environment in a part of the world that is important not only for Colombia, but for the region as a whole, and in terms of diversity of species and contribution to global climate, important for the whole world.
The implementation of a peace accord in Colombia would imply infrastructure development, introduction of new markets, expansion of agriculture, removal of mines and substitution of illegal crops. The UN report expressed concerns over the environmental impact and offered some recommendations.
Before building new roads to access those areas, they have to say, well, what's going to be the environmental impact? Before conceding new mining interests, they have to make sure that the companies that will move in there will mine responsibly and work together with the local communities. They have to look for economic models locally that are environmentally sensitive.
Colombia's former Minister of Environment, Manuel Rodriguez, also agrees that the environmental issue is a huge challenge that needs to be addressed within the framework of proper land distribution.
En Colombia, si no se le da
Many countries that have also faced post-conflict periods did not resolve their agrarian conflicts. So, if Colombia does not give proper land access to the people that need it, and if these lands are not distributed within agricultural borders, farm workers might end up deforesting marginalized lands for survival purposes. The same applies to people who will dispose their arms eventually.
The UN report recommends that territorial planning be considered crucial in the construction of a sustainable peace in Colombia, and that this should be done in coordination with the local communities. This last point is particularly important considering that land distribution has historically been at the core of Colombia's long-standing conflict. From Bogotá, Natalia Margarita, Telesur.
According to children's rights organization in Honduras, violence against children keeps on growing, with almost 1,000 killed in 2014. Our correspondent has more.
According to official information, 947 children were murdered in Honduras in 2014. Some believe the number is higher, making infants the most vulnerable group in the country.
People identify Honduran children, along with women and youth, as the 3 most vulnerable groups when it comes to human rights protection.
The lack of safety in the country exacerbates the problem many minors already face, including in education, development opportunities, and criminalization.
There is an absence of real public education. They are excluded from the right to employment and they are criminalized. Their basic needs are not attended to.
According to Moreno, minors are victims of a state policy.
The state is not one of law, but a function of those who are powerful. In this case, politicians. Organized crime that has relationships with the politicians and the biggest businessmen from the country and from transnational companies.
Due to impunity of the 96% and the lack of opportunities, Honduras is actually a very dangerous place for children. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
The president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, was inaugurated today. Other Latin American presidents, including Rafael Correa of Ecuador and Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, were present. We go to Liz Scherfius for more.
President Rafael Correa attended the inauguration ceremony of President Evo Morales today in Bolivia's plurinational legislative assembly. Upon arriving in La Paz, President Correa spoke of the importance of President Morales' re-election for strengthening the region and furthering social justice. Also present at the ceremony was Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro and President Dilma Rousseff of Brazil, as well as other representatives from UNASUR states. President Morales is beginning his third presidential term and second term in what's been constituted the Second Republic, declaring Bolivia a plurinational state. He is Bolivia's first indigenous president and won the October elections with 61% of the vote. As both Ecuador and Bolivia are pushing forward the ideals and policies of 21st century socialism, President Correa has expressed his political will to increase cooperation with Bolivia to further the process of Latin American integration. Liz Scherfius, Telesur, Ecuador.
Climate change and the danger of nuclear war pose an ever-growing threat to civilization and are bringing the world closer to doomsday, a group of prominent scientists and Nobel laureates said. Their symbolic doomsday clock moved to 3 minutes to midnight. The last time this happened was in 1983, in the height of the Cold War.
Today, unchecked climate change and a nuclear arms race resulting from modernization of huge arsenals pose extraordinary and undeniable threats to the continued existence of humanity. And world leaders have failed to act with the speed or on the scale required to protect citizens from potential catastrophe.
In Greece, the leader of Spain's Podemos party, Pablo Iglesias, arrived in Athens to support leftist Syriza leader Alexis Tsipras in his campaign before the election on Sunday. Syriza currently leads in the polls. Iglesias said Syriza represented the much-needed change in Europe and praised Tsipras as Greeks' hope for a better future.
We live in threat in order to do politics. I think that hope is the best word in order to define the possibility of a change in Europe. I think the wind of change is blowing in Europe, and the name of change in Greece is Syriza. He's representing the change. He's representing the possibility of a Greek government in Greece. I think our countries seems sometimes colonies of the powers of the north and colonies of the financial powers. And I think that we need national sovereignty and we need presidents and we need political parties that defend the people. And I think that Alexis Tsipras and Syriza are an example of that.
Top officials from the US-led coalition against the Islamic State group met in London for the first talk since the Paris attacks. US Secretary of State John Kerry and British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond co-hosted discussions involving 21 of some 60 countries. Hammond expressed concern about homegrown attacks.
The recent terrible events in Paris have reminded us that the battle against ISIL is not confined within the borders of Iraq and Syria, and that this poisonous ideology threatens our own citizens and the citizens of our allies.
Nigeria's National Security Advisor said that next month's presidential and parliamentary elections should be postponed because not all voter cards had been distributed. Sambo Dasuki's suggestion came just 3 weeks ahead of the polling date during a question and answer session at a conference at the Chatham House International Affairs think tank in London. In soccer, Australia's Tim Cahill came to the rescue again, scoring 2 goals, one of them among the most spectacular ever seen at an Asian Cup, to lead the host nation into the semi-finals. With his teammates all fluffing their chances in front of goal, Cahill took it upon himself to calm Australia's jitters and secure a 2-0 win over China in the quarter-finals at Brisbane's Lang Park. Both goals came in the second half, but it was the first in the 48th minute that will be remembered for years to come and go viral all over the internet. More on these and other stories on our website, telesortv.net/English. For Telesor English, I'm Sarah Begum. Good night.